Welcome back to The Ballad of Dena and Andrea, a podcast showcasing songs and conversations in reaction to the story of Andrea Yates and Dena Schlosser, two women who murdered their children in the early 2000s. I wrote an album based on their story in the style of Appalachian murder ballads to create empathetic myths about these mothers. And with this podcast, I've been able to sit down with friends to talk openly about issues that come up from these songs, like religion, mental health, misogyny, our failing justice system, motherhood, grief, and more. Each episode, I'll tell a bit of the story, bring in a friend to chat, and share a song. Please note, in this podcast, we will discuss postpartum psychosis and depression, domestic abuse, suicide, infanticide, and religious zealotry. Please take care of yourself while listening. Also note, when I use the word women, I aim to include anyone who has identified as a woman, female, or femme at any point in their journey. Okay, here we go. There was a story in The New Yorker called The Sorrow and the Shame of the Accidental Killer by Alice Gregory. It spoke of cities of refuge in the Bible. And it rang for me in the case of Dena and Andrea because I don't think they did it on purpose. Whether you or even they agree, the idea of these cities where you could live out your life and be safe from revenge or angry mobs seems like a step in a better direction than what we have now, which is places to rot, places to be ignored, and no real consequences for some people, and over-policing of others. Anyway, so the Lord said to Joshua, "Tell the Israelites to designate the cities of refuge, as I instructed you through Moses," in my previous email, "so that anyone who kills a person accidentally and unintentionally may flee there and find protection from the avenger of blood. If the avenger of blood comes in pursuit, the elders must not surrender the fugitive, because the fugitive killed their neighbor unintentionally and without malice aforethought." So, the Israelites set apart, and I'm paraphrasing Josh now, Kadesh in Galilee, a couple cities in the hill countries, and some wilderness east of the Jordan. When I first heard of these cities, I thought, hey, that's great. But as you read more, it's basically like waiting for trial in our current institutions. So where are the real cities of refuge, of forgiveness? Cities of accountability, responsibility, remorse, and compassion? We have arbitrary holding pens, locked doors, cities of refusal. The seventh deadly sin is sloth. Andrea gives herself things to do. She knits, makes cards, sews aprons, and donates them to charity to sell. There's a charity set up by her and her lawyer in honor of her kids for low-income mothers to get screened for mental illness called the Yates Children's Memorial Fund. There's a link in our show notes, and it's now part of postpartum.net in some fashion. In the divorce proceedings, Andrea was granted 2 concessions of import: her rocking chair, and the right to be buried next to her children when she dies. She is still in the Kerrville State Hospital. She's been denied group outings, denied even the option to go to church once a week, not because she's a danger, but because the media would go crazy. I walk round the garden in Kerrville. I walk round the track in here. It was my hand, but the devil's intent. My brain and my soul were not clear. Can you believe that I'm sorry? There is nothing else I'll ever be. I live with what I did, don't worry. Even out of here, I will not be free. I will politely ask for absolution every day. I ask with simple gestures, I will pray. In the garden, I will breathe. I will bow my head to the trees, Mother Earth, till you take me. I walk round the garden in Kerrville. Walk round the track in here. I guess there's no cure for my ears. I ain't no monster, I'm nothing to fear. Take me back to the garden in Kerrville. energize in action, small and nurturing. To keep my mind clear, I will pray, I will craft, and I will breathe. I will plant my shame in the dirt, Mother Earth, till you take me. For this final interview of the season, I have the immense pleasure of speaking to two of my really good friends. And yes, I have a lot of really good friends. A season full. I'm going to let them explain what they do and who they are, but you are in for such a treat. This couple works for empathy and justice and love in everything they do. Carly D.W. Bones and Zach Bones.
Oh, we're starting now.
Oh, yeah. Okay, oh, take it away, Zach.
My name is Zach Bones, and I am an actor, a teaching artist, and a visual artist here in L.A. I've been a teaching artist going on, oh my God, like 18 years or something crazy. Somewhere between 16 and 18 years. I have to do the math. But what that means is I go into schools, sometimes juvenile detention facilities, child prisons, I'm sorry.
Right, yeah. Kiddie prisons.
Yes, kiddie prisons.
They call them camp in Los Angeles.
It's not camp.
It's not.
It's child prison. I go into schools and, I'm part of different programs, and I teach theater and the arts. To the youths, and sometimes to adults, and sometimes to teachers, and sometimes even to probation officers, because the arts are for everyone. I currently work for a Center Theater Group as a teaching artist and doing some of their educational outreach programs. As a performer, I'm an actor. I like to act on the stage. Then, I am also a visual artist. I would say freelance. I do, set designs and paintings, and
you also play the drums and the banjo.
And I play the banjo and I play the ukulele. I mean, it's one of those things. It's like when you're asked to define yourself, tell us what you do. And it's like I don't really have a job that defines me.
I don't think creatives do. We can't. Yeah. It's like yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt and say you're right. No, we have to do all kinds of stuff. Carly, what would you say that you do? Are you done?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, great.
Hi, I'm Carly D.W. Bones. I also do a lot of things. I'm a theater director. I'm also an intimacy director and coordinator. I do that mostly for theater, the tiniest bit for film, but I really love theater for professional theaters and for a university theater program. So love to get the youth into the intersections of consent and the arts before they go out into the professional world. I'm also a sex educator. I've done work as a mental health advocate, community facilitator, especially around artistic communities, theater communities, and intersections of like mental health and handling conflict and gender inclusion. A lot of things. Also, I did make up my umbrella for everything I do is thespomancer, thespian necromancer.
That's what that means.
Yes.
I see it in the handle all the time, and then I'm like, wait,
People are like, what's the spomancer? It sounds kind of like spores, like it's a mushroom-based thing. But thespomancer, thespian necromancer, I mean, like, to me, that covers all the things because it's like working at the intersections of theater and ritual and community and blah, blah, blah.
And blah, blah, blah. All the important stuff.
Yeah,
blah, blah, blah.
all the important stuff. Yeah, and also our voices probably sound a little shot because we went to see Princess last night and we screamed a lot. So
Princess is Maya Rudolph's Prince cover band.
Incredible.
Just for the
Incredible.
listeners.
If you get a chance to go.
11 out of 10.
If you're listening, Maya, we love you so much.
So much. Wow.
So one of the things that I just really love about you two is that you just live a life of community and empathy and creativity to me. I don't know if you would put those words on you, but I would. And so you had mentioned, Zach, that art is for everyone, right? Why do you feel that way?
I mean, art is a necessity. It is a life necessity, like food or water or community. I think it is quintessential to being a human and living the human experience. I think that it is unfortunate that in our culture we have a tendency to relegate things into categories of, marketable or not. It's only valuable if somebody will buy it. But the truth is that art is the means through which we are able to imagine and imagine for ourselves the people that we want to be, imagine for ourselves the world that we want to live in. And without that imagination, we can have no ambition. We can have, what would we have to look forward to? What would we have to strive for? And, art specifically is the manifestation of that imagination. It is one thing to have thoughts or dreams or ideas, but the first step to making those thoughts and dreams and ideas a reality is to manifest them, write them down, paint a picture, whatever it is. And so especially as you talk about the intersection of, mental health and rehabilitation and, how does a person go from A to Z on a journey of healing or of rehabilitation or of whatever. How do you expect someone to do that if you don't give them tools with which to imagine and manifest their own healing? I think that art is tremendously important. I also think that art is the means through which we cultivate our sense of empathy and understanding in the world. You don't know what it's like to be another person. You will never, who knows with VR these days, but, we will never really know what it's like to truly live in another person's shoes. But the closest we can get is experiencing their story, reading their book, watching their play, looking at their painting, listening to their music, and just get even a modicum of a feeling or of a feeling tone of what it's like to be someone else. And that's so desperately important, so desperately important for us as humans.
Yeah. And I feel that extends to the idea of radical imagination in terms of systems.
Yes.
And I love that
that connection. But Carly, take it away.
Sure. That's exactly where my brain was going, of just like the imagination is a radical tool as the first step in revolution and recreating systems. Like, if we are not taught or given permission to imagine the world being differently, like, it can never be differently. So I think art is a portal for that. And I really do think, as Zach said, it's a portal for empathy. Like, and I think those are, imagination and empathy are two of the most powerful tools in changing systems, in healing. And I think the personal and the like larger social communal are connected. You know, like, I think it's very Fractal's emergent strategy, Adrienne Marie Brown, where it's like, you know, if we nurture those things inside ourselves and in our interpersonal relationships, that is a really powerful way to begin to actually change the larger systems and societies, because it can be really overwhelming to be like, I'm just one little guy. Like, what can I do? But I think if all of us who are just one little guy can, you know, bring those values and priorities to the front of our relationships to ourself and our art and our communities and our people, then it can like ripple out and the smaller pattern can become the bigger pattern.
How do I do that? Like, how does one little guy do that?
Yeah.
Like, what is the doing? What is the that you're doing?
I think it is engaging in artistic practice through life. So it's like reading books. I mean, to me, that was one of my first portals into that empathy and imagination. Like, as a child, it's just like, this is a story that I couldn't imagine before, but now I can, and that I feel for because of that. So it's like, yeah, just witnessing other people's art and stories and like taking the time to, I guess, sometimes slow down enough with it to activate that empathy in your body, if that's not as natural a thing.
Yeah, the time thing relates back to selling everything that you do. And then, like, when I'm in a research mode or something, I have to be like, I'm going to take this in, and I never really let it settle. And I think that taking the time to settle and process the things that we're watching and reading and doing is really important.
And I think, like, that's such a symptom of capitalism, that it's just like we're taught that your art is only valuable if it's marketable or profitable.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that is a thing that impacts us really young, where it's like, oh, you're not good at drawing immediately, well, don't pursue this. You know, you don't naturally have the best voice. Like, you're not a singer. Music is not for you.
Yeah.
But a friend of mine, Kate Bone, no relation, just a
Oh, yeah.
Kate Bone. But she's a actor or musician. But I remember her saying one time when she was getting a group of actors to sing a song, not all of whom were singers, she was like, music is your birthright, like, just as a human. And so I really believe that, like, art is we have a right to experience that as a form of just like expression and processing.
It's a language that we obviously naturally is inside us somewhere.
Yes.
I just think also going back to, what do you do to engage, with, art as a tool for cultivating empathy? And I think that there is a difference between engaging with art and consuming art. And I mean, this is one of the reasons why I love theater so much, is because it is a communal art form. It requires a group of people to create and to experience. One of my favorite rituals is like going to the theater and then being able to like talk about it afterwards. I think that is one of the ways that we use art to cultivate empathy. Or going to an art museum. I feel like whenever I go to an art museum or an art gallery, I feel like I'm going to church.
Yeah.
There's an atmosphere, there's an environment, it's quiet, and everything is arranged and curated for you to experience the art in such a way that you can take it in. I just think that is also important, and not just like, let me binge this TV show or, live my life in books, but like how are you, what's the word I'm looking for, in integrating the knowledge or feelings or information into yourself that you gain from consuming a piece of media.
Yeah, my therapist a couple of weeks ago was like, what is soothing and what is restoring? Like, what? And it's like, oh, totally.
when I practice de-rolling with actors,
What's that?
I'm sorry. Really? Are you really asking?
I am.
Oh God, I love this. I love this so much. Preach.
So this actually is a practice that comes from drama therapy, and a lot of intimacy professionals are using this, but I used it kind of unconsciously as a director before. So I integrate it into everything I do, but it's like giving yourself a somatic ritual to release your work from your body outside of the work. And so it's like, sorry, this is kind of a tangent, but
I love it. That's totally what this is about.
Yes, tangents. So, we teach actors, this is specifically for actors, but I find a lot of people are like, I do this at the end of my workday and da. But actors' work lives in their body, so it tends to get stuck in their body because literally your voice and your body is your instrument.
Yeah.
And we teach actors all these ways to get into character, and then at the end of the work or rehearsal, we're just see ya, good luck.
Yeah.
And then we don't acknowledge that maybe we need to bookend it with releasing it from the body, because and I think especially in Hollywood, we really lionize actors suffering for their art. Mm-hmm. And especially famous men who
go nuts and nail their jizz.
Yeah. Yes. And just there's no concern for consent or harm or how this impacts other people. We're wow, he was just so method
so in
and
it,
so
right.
in it, and that's why his performance was good. And you're okay, I don't think that's craft, but
right, that's losing control.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So instead, de-rolling, I think it's okay, we're building this specific container where you can go really deep into the work. And part of sometimes what lets people go that deep is knowing that they have an off-ramp or a ladder out of that pool.
Sure.
And so it's not just enough to be, so de-rolling to me is you create a kind of, intellectual affirmation and then a physical embodied ritual. So it could be something I don't need to hold my character's trauma in my body outside the work to do justice to their story. Or even my character's guilt or the violence they experienced is not something that I am actually experiencing at this moment in life. Because sometimes our bodies need to catch up to our brain, even if we know it intellectually. You've literally just done the ritual of living and feeling that. Or even why it's often used in intimacy is you're oh, the chemistry that happened in this scene and this other person is the container of the story, and that doesn't need to live in my body.
Oh my gosh, that's fascinating. Showmance.
Yes.
Yeah, we're no, that's just because it's real in the moment. Wow,
right.
That's transformative.
And it is an intimate thing to make art with somebody. And so, but it's just de-rolling also gives you the distance to decide if and how you actually want to act on it and not just acting on it from this activated place. So basically you create your affirmation and then you do some somatic ritual, even something as simple as shaking it out. You're a dog who just got out of a lake and you shake it out of your body, or brush it off head to toe, or create whatever your own thing is.
It is fascinating to me, and also makes complete sense that this is therapy talk, and that because we're actors and people doing art are dealing with emotion, so it makes total sense that they overlap. Yeah, it's why it's kind of hard to separate them when you're talking about it, to separate therapy and art.
Yeah.
But I think that rather than looking at it as, it is therapy, but really what it is, if we get down deep enough, is they are tools and rituals, I guess you could say rituals, for how we manage our experience, our personal experience of being alive today. Of course we can apply this to actors. I know, and I've said this as an actor, that every character I have ever played is in me, is a part of me. I was chosen for that role, so there's something about me that's already perfect or right to connect with that character, and I connect with that character, and I remember. And this was incredibly illuminating for me as an actor to get this tool. But it makes me think about other people that are not actors. Actors are very specific, right? Because we're being asked to step into an intimate and emotional space where our tools literally are our emotions. Yeah. And so, of course, it's obvious that this is something that's very helpful for us. But think about what else you spend your time doing, whether you spend your day at an office, or maybe you spend all day, with your kids, or what are the experiences that we are inundated with kind of constantly that we take for granted, that we don't think about, that we don't look at, that we don't examine, that live in us, and what aspects of those things that live in us do we want to hold on to? And I think that it is incredibly helpful, no matter what you do, like, look at how you spend your time and how much of that sticks to you, and how much of that sticks to you infiltrates other aspects of your life.
I don't have time to do that.
Yeah.
We were talking about rituals, the value and importance of rituals, and I asked the question of, like, what are your unconscious rituals? We could acknowledge the power when we're like, I meditate every day, or I take time out of my week to do this thing, and it really, helps me or has a profound impact on my thinking, on my emotions. But think about the things that you do every day. Those are all rituals, whether you acknowledge them or not. And those rituals have an impact on you, including how often do you look at your phone? That is a ritual.
Compulsively.
It is a compulsive ritual, but it has the same potential profound impact as meditation or as yoga or whatever. We just don't think of it that way.
Sure, but it's a compulsion and not a, I agree with you, but I am like, what's the difference? I mean, I guess the difference is it's coming into your body unconsciously.
Yeah. I would, a couple things. I'm sorry. There's this one backtrack, because this is one of my like soapboxes that I have to get on for 1 second, which is, I don't think art is therapy. And like, this is specifically a thing where I think it is therapeutic.
Yeah.
But it's not therapy. And this is something like that I have learned over time being a director, and intimacy director specifically, of just like that it's really important for me to name. And even for like theater teachers and educators, like, theater isn't therapy. It is therapeutic, but like, I think we are outside of our responsible, ethical scope of work when not therapists or mental health professionals are like, let me heal this for you.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, but also like the acknowledging that it is therapeutic, that it is a tool to express and process is really important. But I just, I think it gets a little messy, and some artists are like, because like I do identify as like a healer in a lot of modalities, but like also being like, it could be a byproduct, but it's not the goal, and it's not, we're making art. And like, if that happens, also amazing. Yeah.
The art coming out of that's the imagination. That's the new stuff that you get to explore with a community. Yeah. I really like that.
Yeah.
What responsibility do you think we have as a community to people who make mistakes?
I mean, we have as much responsibility to them as we do to ourselves, or as we do to anybody, because everybody makes mistakes.
Yeah.
And I think that, yes, we can look at the varying degrees to which those mistakes have an impact on others. Some have more and some have less. But in our current justice system, it often feels to me like we have relegated everything into, if it's illegal, go to jail.
Yeah.
Without asking the question of like, why is this illegal? What is the impact of this? And I think the most important question of what is the cause of this? The simplest example I can think of is like, theft. Theft is illegal, to steal another person's property. But instead of going, why did that person steal from another person? Why did that person rob this other person? Instead, I go, why didn't they have that thing that they wanted or needed in the first place that led to, and what was their inability? What was preventing them from obtaining that in the first place? Because like people, well, I guess you could look at some I was going to say, people that don't have things are the people, that like steal, but there are a lot of like white collar criminals that have more than plenty and also steal. So I guess that doesn't really hold up.
But their why is different. Their why is mischievous, and their why is power.
And their consequences are different too.
I mean, you know what? I will even extend it as far as looking at that, what is it about you? What were you not given as a human? How were you not resourced enough to feel as though the power and money and privilege is enough? I'm not even going to say, well, fuck you. Can we curse on this podcast?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, great. I'm not just going to say, fuck you, you're greedy. It's like, if I look at you as a human being, what were you not given that made you feel like you were already enough, that you need to take more? Yeah. And if I can address that, then I can address the reason why you did it in the first place and potentially prevent you from doing that thing again. But instead, in our culture, it's very much buzzer, you did the wrong thing, go straight to jail. You did the wrong thing, go straight to jail, which leaves no room for exploration, nuance, questions, healing, certainly no room for empathy. In fact, I would go as far to say it is designed to squash our sense of empathy. Because once you dip into that, it raises a lot of complicated questions that are hard to deal with, that we just don't. It's much, much easier to just throw people in a box.
Yep, just let them rot, and we're just ignore the problem. Yep.
Yeah, if I can on this one too, what responsibility we have to people who make mistakes. Yeah, I agree. We have an extra level of responsibility to them, and I think it's really a framework of we have been conditioned to see people who make mistakes as disposable, especially if their mistake is quote unquote bad enough, and that's also extremely subjective. The law says one thing, but the law is a terrible guide for morality and ethics, as we have historically seen and see now continue. But yeah, I think it's really about something just in learning more and trying to learn more about transformative and restorative justice is just a really useful framework to me has been the difference between consequence and punishment. And so it's I think the prison industrial complex and the mentality around incarceration is all punishment based. So it's you did something wrong, you deserve to be punished, and you are a bad person. Good, bad is also a binary with no nuance, and that I don't think is a real thing, most other binaries. But as opposed to consequence, when you mess up or harm people, you lose privilege and power. That is a consequence, and that's a reasonable consequence. Or you lose access to certain people or certain things in certain relationships. But there are also positive consequences, like you do something that gains somebody's trust. You have a more intimate relationship. That's a consequence of your actions as well. And so I think it's kind of reframed, we're very much in the punishment and vengeance track rather than the consequence and justice track. Yeah.
Something you just said really struck me when you said you lose, privilege and power. And it just struck me of what we consider privileges versus human rights. And I think that's a really important distinction to make of yes, if you do something and the consequence that other people are harmed, losing privilege is really, really necessary and important, but I don't think anyone deserves to lose their human rights.
Right. Absolutely.
And I think that's a really, really important distinction to make. And why in our culture do we I think that we consider a lot of human rights privileges.
Yes.
You look at poverty in this country, in this city, and food and shelter and safety and security are viewed as a privilege. You have to earn it. You must earn your privilege. You must prove that you're worthy of living in a home or having food to eat.
Of the four main things that you're supposed to have: shelter, community, sustenance, and something else. I don't know. Pot. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes, together category.
And we look at our incarceral system, and how many of the people that are incarcerated have been denied some of their really basic human rights that go far beyond what I would consider to be a privilege.
Yeah. And that's really like goes back to what you said at the beginning, where it's like, yeah, people steal or, do a quote unquote, crime based on my human needs are not being met. And so like that is the source to go back to. And I really think everything about incarceration, the prisons and also mental institutions too, is about dehumanization, which is like, and so it's kind of the opposite of art leads us to empathy, which is greater humanizing. I don't know. I think people in power and who want those systems to continue to have power know that. I think it's connected to like defunding arts, like fund prisons, don't fund arts, because I think the more access to art that we have, which I do think shouldn't be a privilege, it should be a right, is the more access, the more empathy, the more humanization of people who do things that maybe we wouldn't understand if we didn't have access to empathizing with them.
Why do you think a person might not want to leave an incarcerated situation? And I'm thinking of Andrea. She's up for, it's not parole, it's like up for review every year, and she won't take it. There are obvious things of like shame and like I don't feel like I deserve to be out in the world. But have you seen other situations where you're like...
Just like a human thing, I think, is sometimes we are more scared of the unknown, even if it's like, I don't totally know what this is, but like I know it's going to be better for me than this, but this is what's familiar.
Sure.
I think there's... Exactly. I think there's a safety and familiarity that's like a biological animal thing. Is one piece, and sometimes it's scary to open yourself up to something different, even if you're like intellectually I know this would probably be better for me, but there's a lot of emotions that can block it, and safety and shame and all different things. Fear of the unknown.
I mean, prison does absolutely nothing to prepare you to re-enter the world. There are none, if not very few, systems, programs that do that. And most often, if you go into prisons, the programs that do exist to help incarcerated people, re-enter and reintegrate are often provided by outside sources, or often provided by, other organizations and nonprofits that come in and do work in the prison. The state, does not provide that at all. And I think it's a two-part trauma response. There is the one part of like, especially that if you've been incarcerated for a prolonged period of time, you have learned a way to be. You've learned a way to survive. You have a routine, right? You eat and you shit, and you have, for better or worse, a community of people that know you and that going back to that, it's sometimes safer to go with what you know. And so there's that. But then I think there's also the trauma response of, out there, whatever I did landed me back in here. And I think that there is a trauma response to the world will not accept me, has not accepted me, has already rejected me. So why would I want to go out there? Nobody out there wants me out there. That's why they put me in here. There's literally nothing out there for me.
I feel that way just applying for jobs.
Yeah, no.
I can't imagine. Yeah. Oh, obviously that really hit a nerve for me because I made a joke.
But I mean, just look at all of the stipulations around getting a job for formerly incarcerated people. There's so many job applications like, have you been formerly incarcerated? Have you ever been convicted of a felony? So on and so forth. We talk so much about like, well, I've done my time. This is what we've decided is your punishment, but it doesn't matter. Your punishment will follow you. You will carry it with you everywhere. So what's better, to live in a place where you're like, everybody else is in the same boat as me, and we've all, have this crime, this shame, this thing that we have to carry on our back, or go out into the world with a big stamp on your forehead and have to address it, have to readdress your crime and your punishment every time you try to do what is necessary to like live. That's horrible.
The Dena, she had a job at Walmart. She didn't have to say it. She wasn't convicted. So she didn't have to tell anyone what had happened. And somebody took a picture of her at Walmart and gave it to the news. And then she got fired within hours. So she did her time, was trying to re-enter. and following the rules. Because we don't have the empathy as a culture or the space to say people can change.
Yeah. And I think there's so much of that comes from fear that we're taught of the other, and fear of why did that person need to take a picture of her and give it to the news? Were they concerned for their safety? Were they making a spectacle of this person? Were they trying to create more distance between themselves and her? Because you're oh, it's actually not that. If you see somebody's humanity and you understand why they did it, you could be closer to having that experience. Something you said about the phrase "doing your time" really hit me, and just what we steal from people is their time, which is when we incarcerate them, which is the most valuable and we can never get it back resource that we have, just as humans living for just this brief, precious moment on this planet.
Right.
There are also a lot of prisons, and people might not know this or even think about this. If you are an incarcerated person and you don't have someone on the outside that's waiting for you or that cares about you or whatever, most prisons are built in really isolated areas, right? They're in the middle of the desert, or they're miles from anything, really. And there are many prisons that if you're released, you're done, you get your stuff back, and they say good luck. Yep. The bus stop is 8 miles that way.
Yeah.
They literally don't give you anything, and you literally just have to walk to the bus stop and go somewhere. If you have no money, I don't even know how you're supposed to get on the bus. I
know this stuff, and I'm still don't they give you
no,
$40
nothing.
bucks?
No, nothing
right?
at all. They give you what you came in with.
Oh boy,
it's such a stripping of human dignity, and it's such a setting people up to just be pulled right back in.
I did some deep canvassing, which I know is somewhat problematic in some circles, but we asked everyone at the doors that we canvassed if they had any experience with incarceration in their family. And everybody can answer yes. Or even if they're no, well, I guess my nephew or something like that. So I'm going to ask you both this question. Do you have any experience of your own or your own families with incarceration that you care to share, obviously?
Well, I will say I do have a family member that is incarcerated. And I am willing to talk about it from my own personal experience, but their story is theirs to tell. Yeah. And so I don't want to share that, in a public forum. But I do have a family member that is currently incarcerated. The circumstances of their incarceration, it's as you've said, you hear these things, and it's one thing to know it or to hear it or read a news article of we do what in this country, or they're doing what at these prisons. It is a whole other thing to know someone personally and to get a very close and in-depth look at what is actually happening in these prisons. They are in a prison in Texas. They've been moved all over Texas anyway, but Texas prisons are some of the worst. They were at one point, they were at a prison, I want to say in Brownsville, where now it's Texas, and I think, the last several years, it's gotten to be 112, 114 degrees. And there are prisons that do not have air conditioning.
Wow.
And what they provide for the inmates are cool-off stations, which are water fountains outside, not in the shade, and they give you a towel and the water fountain. And that's how you're supposed to cool yourself off. That prison in particular actually faced a lawsuit because, an inmate died of heat stroke. And I remember calling the prison to confirm and to be what? Hearing from my family member, it's so hot. I can't sleep. there's no relief from the heat. I mean, literally imagining sitting in a cement box when it's 112 degrees outside is inhumane.
It's inhumane. It's
we wouldn't do that to
Literally.
a dog.
No.
Like if you left a dog in a cement room in 112 degree, not only would they take the dog from you, you would go to jail.
Right.
But we do this to people, to humans. And, it's things like that give cause for concern. And you call the prison. Oh my God, every time I call the prison, you call the prison to be like, what is the deal? What is this true? Is this true? And the number one line you get is, well, our policy states. As though because they are following the rules or doing their job, they are alleviated of the moral and human responsibility they have for literally being responsible for people's lives. Yeah. It's horrifying. The best thing I think about this a lot, actually, having a family member that is incarcerated. I think we all like to, especially those of us that are living in America in this time, we have the privilege of not experiencing, major trauma so directly. And we tell ourselves a story. I think we like to fantasize about our moral strength or fortitude. And we watch movies about the Holocaust or about slavery or, about segregation. And I think that those of us that have never experienced any of those things, like to imagine and fantasize that if I was living back then, I would be there at the counters. If I was living back then, I would help free the slaves, or I would run away and take the Underground Railroad. Or if I was, living back then, I would, kill Nazis and harbor Jews and so on and so forth. And the truth is, we are living in that time.
We are.
And if you look at the American prison system, it is the continuation of legalized slavery. And it is such a heartbreaking and helpless feeling to know that and to recognize that and to have somebody that you love that is living like that. And again, I would love to think of myself as like, I gotta go, free my family. And I feel so helpless and so daunted by the sheer size and scope of the monster, of the horror that is the American prison system. Don't fool yourself. We are not past slavery. We are not past, these horrible, horrible crimes against humanity. You live in a country that supports that. You, with your votes, with your participation, support that, or a part of that, whether you know it or not, whether you like it or not.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. Really, thank you. I've got to take a moment for emotion.
A framework that I think about a lot in connecting all these. I think this originally comes from a group, I think it was a Bay Area group called Generative Somatics. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm trying to cite my sources, but this framework that when we were talking about like what are the basic human needs, in addition to like food and shelter, but that their framework is all humans want, need, and deserve safety, dignity, and belonging. And I really think that's a powerful trifecta, and to look at what spaces and systems support that and what spaces and systems like prisons and mental institutions take away those things from people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy because crazy is the wrong word, and I've used it in this podcast more than once.
I've been trying to replace that exactly with wild. It's like, what do I actually mean? Because I think language is really powerful. Like specificity. My favorite maybe quote, I need like a tattoo of this, is this is like an essay from playwright Susan Laurie Parks, who's one of my absolute favorite writers. But in one of her essays, she has this phrase that she says, words are spells in our mouths. And I just really believe that. I think the specificity of what we say is so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you put that in the Haggadah as well. I
put it everywhere.
It's so, I'll say this, but we can cut it out too.
Yeah, sure.
The Bones here put on a Seder every year, a Jew-witch Seder with a very specific and well-crafted Haggadah that is like, there is part of the Black Lives Matter Haggadah, and was it Jews for Peace, or I don't think that was the
Jewish Voice for Peace.
Jewish
Haggadah
Voice.
is one of them. Yeah. It's a magpie.
Yeah, and the Octavia Butler. Oh my gosh, I hadn't read any until I met you guys. And it was like Parable of the Sower should absolutely take over 1984 in our schools. Like, I love 1984, but like this one's the one for now.
Yes. I mean, honestly, that's the book that I'm like, I wish everybody in this country would read that book, but also like content warning for literally everything. It's like extremely triggering. So, look that up if you need to before you read it. But I think that's such a powerful example into how art can use imagination and empathy, like to activate those things. Like science fiction and speculative fiction in particular, I think is a really ripe arena for that. But I think that book is a really powerful example. Something that it's like, her imagination was just like, let's look at a possible, very probable few steps forward of the world, and it's not that far from where we are. Like, it's
not far enough from my comfortability.
Deeply uncomfortably close, but also it's like fallen off the edge of apocalypse in a way. But I love the framework of apocalypse as unveiling, is something that I heard a number of years ago, where it's not like the end of the world. It's just like the veil is lifted so we see things how they actually are.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I wish I took a class called Utopia, Apocalypse, and the Millennium back,
Awesome.
and that would have been a really great thing to have learned. Can you speak to the benefits of sex education and consent culture that might relate to like women's health?
Oh, yeah. Wow. I mean, sex ed, consent-based sex ed, I think, is something that helps the health of every human and individual in both their relationship with themselves and their own body and to each other. I mean, I think I'm just thinking of like connecting it to like where these women specifically got and what was missed. But like, I think teaching people about their own body and anatomies, and that your body is a place to access pleasure and not just like pain and violation is, I think, something that is really important and powerful for a lot of people, but definitely especially like women and femmes in the world living in the context of misogyny, where there is so much entitlement and access to your body that you've not consented to. I did some workshops through this organization that I don't work with anymore for a variety of reasons, but the workshop was great. And it was about like using art and like fictional monologues and theater on college campuses to access better like empathy and support survivors of sexual violence, like in your community, because that is one of the most just common statistics. Like, something I say a lot in theater spaces doing trauma-sensitive practices is everyone's already in the room. Like, there are survivors of all different kinds of trauma. Statistically, they're already in your room. There's like neurodivergent people and disabled people and queer and trans people and survivors of sexual violence and domestic violence and all different kinds of things. And they shouldn't have to out themselves and share like their personal trauma in order to feel a sense of safety, dignity, and belonging in the space. Sorry, my brain is so tangent-y.
It's great. It's great. All there.
So I think just like this framework that my sister shared with me is this idea of like we see survivorhood, especially around sexual violence, as a binary as well. It's either like this really extreme violent thing happened to you or you never experienced this.
Yes.
And most people, especially most women and femmes I know, exist somewhere in the spectrum.
Yep.
And so I think that's a really powerful and also really hard thing to parse for a lot of folks. And this is, I think, something that really came up during like kind of the peak of the Me Too movement, when a lot of people were sharing their stories and realizing, oh, wait, like I think when we take the time to slow down and like actually consider and look at things like consent and bodily autonomy, most of us will realize that we have experienced violations of that on different spectrums. But yeah, I mean, I think even in parenting, and I am not a parent, but I think like if we don't learn these things, how can we teach the next generation? Like we have to model having our own bodily autonomy. I think it's like really powerful and impactful to teach that to like young people and kids in your life, where it's not just like, oh, you have to hug this person, or you go give, you know, grandma a kiss on the cheek, like do this. It's just like, would you like to do this?
Yeah.
You know, and giving people different options. Like you could give her a high five instead if you don't want to do that. And but yeah, I think that like teaching people that their body is a portal to access pleasure, and that pleasure is also a human right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really powerful thing that most of us don't get taught, especially in a young age.
Something that comes up for me is how healing I have found my very little experience in kink. And like, it's that binary situation where like either you want it or you don't.
Yeah.
You're a victim or you are, talk about like brain tangents. My brain is like,
great.
That if you have ever had anything happen to you that you didn't want, you are a victim and you are bad. Yeah. Like you had no control and you don't anymore. Like that's kind of like, that is something that comes up for me. And then to be able to be in a situation where you have to say everything very clearly is really healing and really cool.
Yes.
And I'm saying that as someone who has on the spectrum of things that have happened, it is not that bad for me. But that
even just the fact that like when you're like, oh, I have had people like not respect my autonomy, and that we like this is something I do too, where you're like, not that bad, like
right.
You know, we're like, well, or like it shouldn't have happened at all, and like yes, there are levels and quote, you know, obviously like worse things, but like that's so subjective. Just the fact that we need to minimize our experience,
or like when we didn't feel comfortable, right, or felt
unsafe. Well, that's a other tangent, but I do want to come back to kink because that's one of the things I'm really passionate about as a sex educator and just a human. But yeah, like I think something that I talk about a lot as an intimacy director and also as a director and all the things is like I think it's really powerful to specify, again, specific words, the difference between uncomfortable and unsafe, where it's like unsafe is like harm, danger, like going into survival mode and like it is not okay. But uncomfortable like often is outside of like what we're confident doing. Mm-hmm. It feels maybe awkward or even bad. Like it sucks to feel uncomfortable. Like I personally do not enjoy it, but like that's where we grow as artists and humans. So if we have no tolerance for discomfort, we can never grow beyond what we are now.
Yeah.
But yeah, what I love what you were bringing up about like kink connected to this. And I think that that's bless the kinksters for all of their consent practices that they have bestowed upon the world. And, you know, like, and no community is perfect. There are also lots of like notorious consent violations within kink communities too. Because
we're all humans.
Right. And coming back to this whole thing, like how do we treat people who mess up or make mistakes? That's all of us. We've all fucked up.
Yep.
In different ways, but it's like what matters is how we handle it when we do fuck up, not if we fuck up, because we will inevitably. But I think kink is really can be a very powerful and sometimes like healing and cathartic tool for folks to explore, especially around consent, because there is so much conversation, negotiation, and like because you're playing closer to the edge of danger, I suppose, or taboo or charged things, like it necessitates a more mindful conversation and practice and care. And I think for a lot of folks, it can be really empowering and even healing to explore a dynamic or a archetype or an embodiment of something that you did not get to choose, but then now you get to choose what position and where you enter that specifically, and like how long you want it and who you're doing it with and all these different things. So I think it can be a really powerful ritual. Like that to me, that's also a ritual.
For sure. Yeah.
There was something else too you said about just like, you know, the intersection of, you know, mental health and bodily autonomy. Autonomy is also a human right.
Yes.
And it makes me go, you know, what are women especially, what are women taught about their own autonomy and about their bodily autonomy, whether it is directly, verbally, you know, from people, men, bosses, parents, whatever.
Specifically from religion in this
religion,
case.
yes. And also, though, non-verbally, just the way that women are treated in our society. How that, I feel like, again, we rather than looking at the crime, looking at the cause of, and I'm sure this could be applied to a lot of people and not just these women, but, violence as a way of reclaiming autonomy, or violence as a way of pushing back against a feeling of not being in control, of not having the ability to choose for yourself. It's like, well, I'm going to make the ultimate choice to prove that I am free. And it's like, what would happen if we just worked really hard to make sure people knew and felt like they were free and had autonomy in the first place? How many of these instances of violence would be avoided because people don't feel like they need that?
Yes.
I think people can act violently when violence is used against them so much that they're backed into a corner. And I think we have this hierarchy of violence where we're like, oh, interpersonal violence is the worst thing. And then we don't look at what are all the instances of systemic violence that forced a person to enact interpersonal violence. Again, not that I condone that in any way, but I think that it's for oh, this person was so bad and violent. And you're like, wait, did we not talk about all the violent things that happened to them that pushed them into acting in this way?
We have such a, there's such a cognitive dissonance, especially within our justice system, about violence and violent crimes. We watch SVU and we watch these, we watch the news and we hear about mass shootings, and it gives us the illusion that, when you have a conversation about prison or restorative justice, there's always that guy that goes, well, what do we do? What do we do with all these crazy people? What do we want to do with all these people that just want to go out and murder a bunch of people? What do we do about the serial killers? If we actually look at the numbers, the statistics, that person that exists who is a complete sociopath who and even in those circumstances, you could whittle that down to, they became this way as a byproduct of their upbringing, their circumstance, brain damage, physical brain damage. And so there's a 0.00001% of people who are born with, and again, sociopathy is a disease. That 0.0001% of people who are born this way who are Michael Myers, the fantasy killer that we think about. And then what we do is we assign that identity to everyone that commits a violent act. You're just a murderer. You're just a bad person. You're just a crazy person. When the truth is, if we really were to break down, murder, the number of people that kill other people, the highest number is not the stranger stalking you, from the street. The highest number are the people that you are closest to, that either have a mental break, are already abusing the people that they kill, and they take the natural progression to murder, or it is a crime, as they call it, a crime of passion, a thing in the moment where you are so emotionally distraught over whatever that it causes you to act out this impulse.
Yeah, your domestic partnerships
Right.
are some of the most those are the most dangerous, right? I am remembering a moment at one of the camps talking to the guys. It was at one of the boys' camps. We were talking about, I don't know how we were on the subject, but talking about how rating bad crimes and being like, should you go to prison for life for murder? And they were like, no, because there are so many reasons why that might happen. But they said you should go to prison for life if you rape someone.
Wow.
These were teenage boys. I couldn't believe that they said exactly what rape is in that moment and what control over someone else's body is.
I think that makes sense for them, for that logic. Even if we just look at it of exactly to have power over someone in that way requires, I feel to some extent, a modicum of intent, of conscious, I'm aware of, and yeah, I don't know.
I mean,
I don't necessarily.
I don't agree with
I don't
them.
necessarily agree with them, but it is interesting, and I think that is also interesting too because we are such a culture of violence. We were actually just talking about this just the other day about like what violence is acceptable and what violence is unacceptable, and the truth of the matter is that we as a culture, violence is not taboo. It is the context in which violence occurs that is taboo.
Yeah.
There is no moral hierarchy. We have no cut and dry rule about like murder or violence is bad. It is very specifically, murder and violence without the appropriate paperwork is bad, right? Murder
Yes.
without bureaucracy. A person who is starving on the street, has mental health issues, and like has some kind of break and kills someone to get some money or some food or whatever. Bam, straight to jail. A police officer who kills an innocent person because they're afraid in the whatever reason or
Right.
excuse that
Whatever
they
they
give or whatever. It's like, well, you get to keep your job. You get a medal for bravery. We give you a pat on the back and say, it's okay. It's a hard job, and it's like, it's just so hypocritical and
my
just
gosh,
does
for
not, there's no hard and fast rule for us. And I think that deserves a closer look about how we interact with violence.
Well, I think that's such a brilliant and correct perspective. But I think like to continue with that, I think the rule is who is the violence against? Like I think if the violence is against somebody in a position of power and who maintains the systems as they are, then there is consequences for violence against those people. But I think when those people commit violence against others, in the examples that you were saying, then it's condoned. It's like literally state condoned violence.
I just imagine, the weird psycho, kidnapper is like, I kidnapped this person and I kept them locked in this, cement room for 3 years and I, barely fed them and blah, blah, blah. And that guy gets arrested and then goes in front of a judge and is like, we are going to lock you in a cement room for the rest of your life. It's just like, but you just...
Make
Make it make sense.
You make it make sense. Yeah. With Dena and Andrea, so much of what I consider to be what led them to where they are was religion. Were you raised religious at all, either of you?
Yeah, I think we have very different experiences, but I can share mine. So I was raised Jewish, and I still am Jewish, though now I call myself a Jewitch because I love a good portmanteau. Lesbomancer, Jewish. But yeah, so it was. I was raised like Reform Judaism in the Bay Area, but also still very Jewish. Like we would go to synagogue always for high holy days and for some other holidays. And I went to Hebrew school 3 days a week growing up. So like Tuesdays and Thursdays after regular school and on Sundays. I was bat mitzvahed when I was 13, and my dad's family was very Jewish. His sister married a rabbi. My mom was not raised Jewish. She was Christian, her family was. Not super religious, but she converted to Judaism before marrying my dad because it was, I think, particularly important to his mom and his parents. But there's a whole interesting, another tangent conversation about like Jews marrying Jews and all of that. And I think it does come from a place of like survival, which I have so many tangential conversations about that. But
next time we'll
but
do
yeah,
another one.
my mom's a very spiritual woman, and she was like, yeah, great. And in Judaism, technically, even though like it is a patriarchal religion in so many things, like most Judeo-Christian religions, it is through the mother's lineage that technically counts if you're Jewish. Right. And so it was a whole thing like, so because she converted to Judaism and is Jewish, then me and my sister would be truly considered Jewish.
Wow.
So, yeah. Anyway, so tangent. So I grew up, I grew up Jewish, and it was a thing I, identified with, but it was also just something I'm like, oh, this is just how it is. And there were a lot of things and practices in the culture I loved, and some that I was like, this is just like autopilot. And then I think there was a, period, maybe like later in high school and in at least the first half or more of college that I just kind of I didn't like consciously move away from it, but I just like took kind of space from that identity. And then at the end of college, I started to like come back to it and be like, oh, what an incredible and valuable and what a privilege it is to be connected to an ancient ancestral tradition that I still have access to. But like as I got older into my 20s and 30s, I really reconnected with it when I could reclaim it on my own terms and reject the parts of it, like the very patriarchal parts of it, like in very Orthodox Judaism, which again is not how I was brought up, but like even like gender binary alert, the women and the men have to be in separate sections in the synagogue. Wow. Like you can't pray together. And so and again, like that's not my lived experience, so I can't really speak on that, but there's a lot of things that I was like, oh, I find like this piece problematic, or like even modern American Judaism and how integrated that is with Zionism and the state of Israel. That's a whole long other conversation.
Oh my gosh, and it totally connects with Christian fundamentalists.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Woo.
Yeah. So anyway, there's a lot of pieces of it that, as I grew into myself, I was like, oh, there are pieces of this that I find so valuable and spiritual and ancestrally resonant, and there are pieces of it that I want to consciously reject. And so to me, that was my Jewish identity, because I'm also a witch, and I believe that ritual is a really powerful thing. I mean, my favorite medium is theater. I believe a play is a spell. Like we enact with actual bodies and words and voices a story that we tell in front of people live over and over. And so it's like, that's why I'm also really particular about what plays I want to work on and direct, because sometimes I'm like, why are you putting that spell into the world? Okay. Like, is that what we need right now? But anyway,
bring money.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh yes, theater. All that theater money.
Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, it was a way for me to reclaim and reconnect, like on my own terms. And I found out there are other people who practice this that I like really love and admire their work. Dory Midnight, incredible queer Jewish who is like absolute hero of mine, and her writing is so powerful. And then even like one of the witch podcasts I listened to for a while, The Witch Wave with Pam Grossman, I heard her call herself a Jewitch, and I was like, I've never heard anybody else say that before. And it was so, we're out there. But yeah, and so I've been able to like slowly start to, I don't want to say reclaim, but just like reconnect to things that I think give me such deep nourishment and sustenance. And as I said, like the privilege of being able to connect to ancestral traditions that are so ancient that not everybody has. And I also think there's something interesting, especially in modern American Jews, that so many have assimilated into whiteness and white privilege. And like, I am white and benefit from white privilege, but like, I think that Jews were not always considered white in this country. And that I think by gaining proximity to whiteness and that privilege, sometimes like access to our culture can be lost. So yeah, that's my very roundabout answer of my experience with religion. And so now I do love to celebrate Jewish holidays, but I like to like reimagine and reinvent them. So like I created in 2018 the Jewish Haggadah for Pesach, Passover, and it's a living document that I update every other year. Up next, working on Slutty Feminist Purim. It's the next holiday I'm trying to do, but I also want to do something for Sukkot. I want to create a monthly like Shabbat arts and crafts night in potluck. Yeah. Shabbat. That's my other portmanteau. So yeah, I don't know. So that's how I intersect with religion very, very freely and creatively, I think.
Marvelous. And Zach, were you raised with a religion?
Oh Lord, strap yourself in. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
I heard Texas, so...
well, no, I mean, I before Texas, there was Utah. So I was actually raised Mormon. My mother... Did you not know this?
I did not know
that.
Oh,
wow. Okay, so my mother was Mormon. Her family was Mormon. My father converted when they got married. And so I have, 3 brothers. And when we were young, fortunately for me, I think that my mother and my oldest brother, were the only 2 that really kind of bought in. I don't know that my father was ever totally bought in. He converted for her, and my middle brother was like, give a fuck. But so it was never forced on us, fortunately. When we were younger, we would go to church. When I was old enough to say, I don't want to go to church, I wasn't forced to go to church. Fortunately, it was not something. It was still definitely some of the tenets of the religion. It was definitely a part of my parents' teaching style. I think until they realized that most of that would not work on me.
It's not going to stick, sorry.
But I will just say, from a very early, it was never right for me. I think in part it was easy for me to extract myself from that because, being a person of color, there are not a lot of people of color in the Mormon Church. There is a reason for that. The LDS Church, the Church of Latter-day Saints, did not actually allow membership of Black people until like the 80s.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Which actually, this is a little side tangent, which I learned something interesting is that, for as much of a history of, pretty direct and explicit racism as there is, it is projected actually that the church in, the next decade or so will be predominantly people of color because of the proselytizing, because of the missionaries, because the Mormon Church, and I'm going to come back around to my own experience, but I'll just say this as a setup. The Mormon Church is run like, I will say cult, but that's talking about something else. But it is run like a business because the truth of the matter is the tenets of the church are not sustainable for most of anybody's human experience, in the world, unless you really sort of isolate yourself, which a lot of people do. And I was wondering this the other day. I was like, I wonder what the rate is of loss versus gain. And it is designed specifically that way, I think, because they know that not everybody that is born into the church or joins the church is going to stay. And so they have to continue to proselytize to keep their numbers up, right? Because it's a numbers game and it's all about money. And can we make enough money to build the temples and blah, 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 blah. And so because there are so many, because it is a part of the practice, it's like you go on a mission 2 years, go to some other country, that there's going to be a turnover eventually. Yeah. Anyway, to take it back to my own personal experience, it was already something, being at church was never a comfortable or pleasant experience, just because I was the only brown person there. And not that there was ever explicit racism, but there is definitely, microaggression racism, and there was definitely an acknowledgement of otherness. And so where often religion serves the function of community, practice, ritual. You go once a week, you see the same people, and where that, I think, ordinarily has a chance to root in a person of being something that is important to you or part of your identity, it never took root for me because I never felt like that was my community. I never felt welcome or really a part of it. But I can remember being very young in Sunday school and having some questions. And, I think I can remember being as young as 7 and being in Sunday school. It's very elementary. And, this is all about Jesus. And there are 2 circumstances in which I can remember very distinctly, one of which was when they were like, we're the one true church. And they're trying to explain to us that, we are the one true church and all of the religions are wrong. And I just remember going, wait. What? And even at 7 years old, my brain was in not even in a combative way. I was born into this, right? So it wasn't even as though I had already had a sense of rebellion or anything like that. It was just plain and simple logic. And I was like, but what? There are so many other religions that have been around for centuries. They're so much older than this, and they all believe that they're the true religion. What makes us any different? Why would we? What? To which the answer was just yeah, they're all wrong. Yeah. And I was like, that again, cognitive dissonance here. And I remember another occasion too where they were trying to teach us about homosexuality and how that's wrong or whatever. And I remember, again, being very young and raising my hand and just going, but why? If people are love each other or want to be together and they're not hurting, why would that ever be a bad thing? And mind you, this is, again, who knows what graced my, childlike brain to be able to see these things or ask these questions. Because, again, I lived in Utah, completely immersed in this culture.
Right, so it could have gone either way. So why?
And again, to this day, I don't
love
but
that.
It was just simple logic, simple childlike logic.
Just a side note.
Yeah.
One of the women who grew up in fundamentalist Christian territory that I have spoken with, those were her two examples, her first two examples as well. Just like this logic when she was like 10. And it is that and I have a similar feeling about Christianity when I was around that age too. Yeah. And it's like, oh, your brain starts working and you realize.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
There's a really beautiful, actually, I've talked to some, what often people refer to themselves as foremans, former Mormons.
Oh.
And I had met this foreman and they had said, oh yeah, what was your shelf break moment? And I was like, shelf break moment. And I was going to say, too, is I remember being a child and asking this question, like, but what if, but why? And I remember explicitly being told, just don't ask questions like that. And that's when I knew.
Yep.
That's when I absolutely knew. I was like, there is something so fundamentally wrong about you discouraging me from asking a question, discouraging me from critical thinking. And so when I was like, shelf break moment, what do you mean? And she was like, in the Mormon church, when you ask a question the church doesn't have an answer for, they tell you to put it on the shelf, and that shelf is for God, and God can handle all those questions that you can't answer yourself. And at some point, your shelf just gets too full, and then it breaks. Your shelf break. And I was like, I thought that's a really beautiful analogy. Your shelf break, when the shelf can no longer contain all of the questions that you have that the church cannot answer.
There's something that makes me think of that I really do love and appreciate about Judaism. And this is probably more like cultural than religious, but that's such a interesting blend. And most of Judaism is this Venn diagram that overlaps between the two, but is that it is very Jewish to ask difficult questions. That's a thing that I do really resonate with and embrace, and that it's asking complicated, difficult questions and discussing and debating and philosophizing them and not necessarily having one answer is something that I think is a really beautiful practice. And definitely, again, that's not in all Judaism and all religious Judaism, but that's something that I really value and take, and just because critical thinking and actually being allowed to be curious and discuss, I think is a really
having choices.
Yes, having agency.
Yeah.
I think it's a really it's a tool for liberation to be able to ask questions.
Religions like the Mormon religion, I don't want to come off as being especially, what's the word, adversarial. Mormons are very nice people, which is also one of the things that makes their whole shtick so incredibly sinister.
Yes. Well, Sondheim taught us nice is different than good.
Nice is different than good. Again, I'm speaking from my own personal experience. In my personal opinion, religions like the Mormon Church are specifically designed to target and prey upon people who are vulnerable, mentally and emotionally vulnerable. Because the truth of the matter is that the other function of religion, aside from community, is for us to grapple with the largest questions that we have about being alive. Questions that we all grapple with. It is part of the human experience, and it can be scary. It can be terrifying. What happens to me when I die? What should I do in this life? What does it mean to be a good person? Am I significant? Am I connected to something greater than myself? And what is that thing? And these are big questions, heavy questions, difficult questions that can be the source of a lot of anxiety and fear and worry and paralysis. Yeah. And it is really comforting to have someone go, here's the answer. I have an answer for that. I have an answer for that. I have an answer for that. Yeah. Or to have someone say, don't worry about it. Join us, and all those things you won't ever have to worry about.
You will never have to be accountable. You will never have to be responsible.
Right. And so the other thing that does is...
Art is just religion without answers.
Yes. Oh,
yeah.
I love that.
We say all the time, we're like,
that.
going to see a good play or concert or art museum
go to
is
church.
church.
Going
That's
to church.
church.
It's going to church because it is the question and asking the question and exploring imagination, the possibilities is how you deal with it. Because I think that once and only once you can accept and confront the fact that, one, there are some things that you will not know, and two, confront and accept the fact of like, here is what I actually have control over, which is you, and even in that has its own limitations depending on the society and culture that you live in, then you have the freedom to like actually move forward and have autonomy in the world. And so these religions, they know this, and they encourage you to be like, we are the only ones that are ever going to give you these answers. And if you try to explore or search outside of this, you're not going to find it. It's not going to be good. And that is such a terrible and helpless and frightening feeling. I mean, I will say, I know people that are still in the church that are slowly trying to, extract themselves from the church. But it's really beautiful and fascinating to watch them have these realizations. And I feel for them because I also recognize how terrifying, and especially if you've built the foundation of your life on the tenets of this thing, and then you realize you're like, oh my God, the world is so much bigger than this tiny island I've been living on. And while that is both expansive and, horrifying, it is also really exciting. If you just have the bravery to like jump off the island and swim into the ocean of the unknown, the possibilities are endless. And even with religion, it's like, as secure as you feel, you reach a point where there are limitations.
The idea of motherhood, of parenting.
Yeah.
I am child-free by choice. It never really was an issue for me.
Yeah.
I've talked to other people on the podcast where it's been yes, no, yes, no. The thing that I've come to realize by just being a woman and having birthing-bodied friends, like, maybe it'd be cool if we didn't have to answer the question ever. Or like, we're never going to have one answer, and we're expected to have the one answer that we're supposed to have for the rest of all of our life.
Right.
So I just want to talk about your experience with that, with having the question of motherhood be on the table.
Yes.
Is it? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's something that we're really interested in exploring probably very soon. But we'll see.
Immediately I'm like,
TBD. We're also very, and I was like, again, as you said, things change. Like at this point, I'm like, yeah, if it happens, incredible. If not, our lives are amazing and fulfilling. But I'm like, maybe I'll feel different in the middle of the journey, you know?
Yeah.
But gosh, I mean, it really feels like, people who have birthing bodies, like there is this pressure because, oh my God, for so many reasons, but a really big thing, especially as somebody who's like mid-30s, I feel like our social, what is the word? I guess our kind of social evolution has moved faster or is on a slower timetable right now than our biological evolution.
Yes.
So it really feels like, oh, time's a ticking for your womb and da da da. But it's like, oh, can I take my time and like, I think, and be like really mindful of if and when and how I want to bring another person into this world.
Yep.
But it is something that I think I'm really interested in. And just like we have, this is a moment where we're like, suddenly a lot of our friends are like, they have babies now.
Yep.
Bebes. Little bebes.
Those things.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot. I think I go back and forth, and we've both talked about this, of just like, is it ethical to bring a person into this world in this moment? Like the planet and the people and everything. Yeah. But also generally, I was talking with one of my dear friends yesterday. It was just like, oh, but the people who take the time to consider those things are the people who I'm most hopeful to make more people, and vice versa, which is really a hilarious irony. But yeah, I mean, I think this is something that Zach says. It's just like, it's part of a human experience for a lot of people, obviously not for everyone, but like I'm interested in the profound expansion into another dimension of love. I'm really interested in what I would learn from a future child by being a parent, not just like what I could teach them, but like how it will make me see the world differently. But yeah, I mean, there are really important things like that we talked about today of like that we have talked about, like if we have a kid, it would be really important to teach them the values of empathy and imagination and critical thinking and bodily autonomy and like, mindfully gifting those things to a young person. What will bloom if we plant those kind of seeds?
Yeah.
I know that, well, I'll say two things. One, as a person who can't give birth, I'm extremely jealous. I genuinely mean that. I really wish, because, life, there's only so many things you get to experience in life, and I want to do them all. Like I want to suck the marrow out of it, if you will. And the one thing that is maybe supposedly the biggest, most profound, and let's face it, magical thing that humans can do, and I will never get to personally experience like growing a human, and that really bums me out.
I would let you if I
know.
No,
I know. We joke that if I was the one that could get pregnant, I'd be like, we'd
already
have 2 babies
do it.
already.
Yeah, I can't tell if that's because the reverse of that is me being like, I know it's something that only this chemical makeup of a body can do.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe, I don't know, I've never checked my fertility, but like it is on one hand like, oh, that's a magical process that could happen, and I'm like, does every flower have a flower? Does every bird have another bird? Like, I'm looking for nature to tell me like it's fine, even though intellectually I'm like, yeah, it's fine, I don't want one, but there is that like the process is interesting.
Well, the next thing I was going to say is that I do kind of want kids, but if I'm being really honest with myself about the reasons why I want kids, they're all entirely selfish.
Yeah.
And I don't know that any of the reasons that I want to have kids are good reasons to have kids. Not that I think that you have to have a good reason to have kids. I think that it is, again, going back to human rights, choosing to have a child is a thing that you should be allowed to do, I think.
Or choosing not to have a
No,
child.
exactly. So, I always say, I'm like, it's a thing to do. It's a part of like human experience. But yes, I do have concerns about the ethical ramifications of bringing children into essentially a dying planet.
Yeah. What are your reasons that you want them? What are the selfish reasons?
So my selfish reasons are, one, I think I'd be a good father.
Extremely.
Two, it's a thing to do. It's a thing to experience. And, what would the benefit to me be? My own emotional, spiritual, mental, growth of being responsible for another human being. Of course, there's the biological drive and imperative to propagate, to make a little me, to push out into the world. Go, genes, fly. Those are all things that I know, are like deep in me. And I think that a lot of those things are just animal. And I don't think that all of our animal instincts are necessities for life, but they're there. And sometimes you want to honor those animal instincts, but like really thinking about the larger repercussions of acting on those instincts, I think is really important and really valuable. And yeah.
When it feels like it's more dangerous and unhealthy to have a child than it has ever been. I know that is wrong, but I'm going to stumble over this, but
speaking in draft.
Oh, right. Speaking in draft. Oh, I like that.
That's from Nicole Brewer. I learned it at her anti-racist theater workshop. There's like this agreement that everyone gets the grace to speak in draft and the responsibility to edit your draft if it's wrong or harmful.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's great. I was going to say specifically for Black women in this country, I, of course, am not. I am white. But I just can't imagine that wouldn't affect my decision or my want or desire. But going back to the fact that it is actually dangerous and harmful for a body to go through that, it's not just a magical, my friend has a podcast, she's like, we're not all magical vessels, about people who can give birth. And yeah.
I think we are, and we're more than that too. But I think that's anybody's body can be a magical vessel as a creator of life, not necessarily a human life, but art like gives life, and all that. But I do think there's something existential about deciding to have a, there is like, in addition to the like animal or connected to the animal, but like the drive is like, oh, this is like an extension of my mortality.
Yeah.
You know, or it's the closest we can access in a way to immortality in a way that's still in alignment with nature and doesn't like go against it.
I think there's something, too, I want to speak to the danger of having children, and not just the physiological danger of having children, but, you know, you talk about it's more dangerous than it has been, and I think that's true in that we have a much higher birth success rate as humans, right, with medical advances and technology. Kids died far more frequently, you know, 100 years ago, 500 years ago than they do today. You know, successful births where both mother and child get to survive, much higher today for humans with all of our, you know, medical advancements than, you know, 500 years ago. But what then?
Yeah.
And how are we resourced now to raise kids in this world versus if you're, you know, a caveman in a tribe of, you know, 20 to 30, where every child that's born is a member of the tribe, valued as a member of the tribe, and cared for by the whole tribe. You know, you are supported and, you know, talking about, you know, Dena and Andrea, like, what resources do you have to bring a child into this world? Not physiologically, but all the other stuff that comes after you give birth, and how difficult and frightening it must be to be like, we're considering, well, we should have, you know, and we're very privileged people, but it's like, what is it like to bring a child? Do we have enough money? Do we have enough space? Do we have enough flexibility in our career to give the child enough, you know, attention and love and care? And, you know, are we close enough? Do we live in physical close enough proximity to our community, to our family, that are the people that are going to provide the most help? And like, if you don't have any of that, like, it feels like having a child would be impossible, or a huge sacrifice of your life. And I think that that's how we view it today. And that is a totally different kind of danger of like, I've had a child. Am I resourced to keep it alive? Am I resourced to keep it healthy and happy? And do I have the resources to give it the basic necessities of life?
I've never had enough money to have a kid.
Listen what I'm saying. Listen what I'm saying.
Wild.
So I think in that way, it is far more dangerous to have a kid today.
It makes me think of a couple different things. One, I mean, part of like the reason we're even able to consider is how privileged we are in like the space we have and the resources, and mostly being so rich in community. And just like, I know my family and my parents would be like so game to come and help, and that we have like a literal like coven of aunties who would like show
Uncle Becky. Uncle Becky, come home and
Uncle Becky. But for real, and like that's something that, you know, we talked about. There's like, I could not have a kid away from our community. And that also just makes me think of, I think it's both like capitalism and kind of heteronormativity culture that is very like isolate this very small individual family unit.
Yes.
And it's like just depend on just this tiny group to like survive and for all of your needs. And you're like, that's
and
not
in some ways,
real.
Just depend on the mother.
Yes.
Isolate the mother and the child, and that and postpartum psychosis, postpartum depression, postpartum depression, like all of that happens in these little bubbles.
Yeah. There's something like also really interesting that recently is just thinking of also like in thinking of like queering the way that we raise children or have families or all different things. I think that like even pregnancy or trying to get pregnant or all different things are so personal and so often, and again, like autonomy, people can decide and I haven't experienced this, so I don't know what level of privacy I'll want, but like I think there's a lot of like this is very private, especially when you're like in the beginning and you're like the first trimester is like the most risky, and so it's like don't tell anyone except for your partner, which understandably, and I really respect that choice, and I was like, again, I have not experienced that, so I might make the same choice, but I remember talking to somebody a friend of somebody that I know when they got pregnant, and they were saying like they want to be open with everyone in their community because they will need the support of everyone in their community regardless of what happens.
That's it. If we this weird superstitious timeline that we have of that first trimester is so based on the fact that we don't look at miscarriage and as natural things that happen in any kind of birth. Like that yes, that is it is sad, but it happens to so many women.
Yeah.
And we don't talk about it. Like, your community should be like, oh, nuts, try again if you want. or
Right.
whatever. Like,
Or, like,
support
what do you
whatever
need?
decision, what do you need?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we come make you dinner and hold you while you cry, or laugh about it, or, you know, whatever, instead of just isolating into like this
think there's
really
also-
small
Focusing
unit.
on that the baby is the important, like, seed.
Rather than the people who are
community
living.
and the people who are living.
I think there's also, though,
non-parents.
like a lot of stigma and shame, as you were talking about women as vessels.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, this is the highest thing that you could ever achieve as a woman. And that if you lose the baby, that is some fault of your own as a person, your failure to, you know, fulfill your womanly duties.
Yeah.
And, you know, what is your value?
It's weird to hear that from a male voice and not be like, I'm going to punch you.
Like,
But yes, exactly.
But yes, like, what is your value to society? And I think that is another thing that causes, you know, a lot of women to have a lot of, like, fear and, like, I don't want to tell, you know, people. And, instead of embracing, like, this is a part of the process.
This is the whole thing.
This
Right.
is what happens
It's
in nature.
superstitious and religious.
Yes.
It's all of it together being, like, just creating fear and shame for a woman.
Yeah.
And
or
that's so,
birthing person.
yeah, it's so connected to also, exactly, I was going to say, like, gender identity as genitalia and reproductive organs, and value as a person, specifically based on your gender as a woman, based on the functionality of this organ in your body, is bananas.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a huge thing to consider. And I think it's one of those that, like, I always have thoughts. I'm like, oh, as a parent, like, I would do this, or I would think this, or da-da-da. And I was like, I literally cannot know. It's such a different experience. Like, even as a person who, like, in all my jobs and aspects of life, I really think I'm a nurturer. I try to bring, like, big empress energy, like, from the tarot. That's how I live my life. But, like, I am not an actual parent, except to our cat. But I'm not an actual parent of a human. I've never raised a person or had a baby or had a child. And so I can think all these things like, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to whatever. But I'm like, it's such a, if it is something I experience, I'm sure it will be such a profound experience that there will be things I cannot predict.
For sure. Yeah. Including what will happen with your brain chemistry and hormones.
Oh my gosh. Yep. That's a wild, be a wild ride.
Wild ride.
And that's like another thing that I think, you know, also thinking of these women in particular, like that destigmatizing and unshaming talking about our struggles and like what we're going through in mental health and how mental health intersects with gender roles and chemistry of our brains and all different things. I don't know. I think like conversation and being able to share and express things is not just healthy, but like essential, because otherwise they bottle up and have to release in some way.
Right. Yep. Yeah. I fucking love you guys.
I love you. Thanks for having us.
Great.
Is there, who or what organizations are out there doing good work right now that you like? Who are you really digging right now? Who's doing some good work? Besides Princess.
Homeboy Industries.
That's what
is
I was
awesome.
going to say.
Yes!
That was mine. Yes, that was mine. I
can
wonder
think about it,
if somebody
sure.
else has mentioned that. Homeboy Industries is a Los Angeles-based organization that provides reintegration resources for formerly incarcerated people. It helps get them jobs, reintegrated into the workforce. They have tattoo removal programs. They have mental health resources. It is really, really hard if you are a formerly incarcerated person to reintegrate. It requires, again, a lot of resources. Being in prison in and of itself is a traumatic experience. And even to be able to have a successful and healthy life afterwards, just like we all do, you need access to mental health resources. You need community. You certainly need money.
Yeah.
And so they do all of that. They also run a bakery Homeboy Bakery. It is in downtown Los Angeles. It is in Chinatown. But you'll often can find their products all over the place.
You can buy it online. You can go to Homeboy Industries.
So even if you
so yummy,
like support them, or if you have somebody who is currently incarcerated or formerly incarcerated that needs some help, reach out to Homeboy. And if you're just like, oh, that sounds cool, but I don't really want to like support. You like pastries? Everybody likes pastries. Go buy yourself a muffin or their carrot cake.
Their carrot cake's amazing.
So good. And made by a formerly incarcerated person. So support them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's we were same page. I was thinking of that. I was thinking of two books. I love books, so I wanted to shout out a couple of books that for me have been really impactful resources in this work, especially around having language and frameworks to have these conversations. One is Adrienne Marie Brown's book, We Will Not Cancel Us, which is, it's like a tiny hot pink book that is very mighty. And it's a really great exploration of, because I think this is like, could be a whole other conversation, because I'm not anti-canceling. Like, I think that canceling is an important tool, and it's kind of been co-opted by a lot of like white mainstream culture in a way that it was not meant to be. But like, I don't know how she frames it is like, that's an emergency brake. And sometimes you need an emergency brake to pull the brake when somebody who is abusing their privilege and power is not stopping. But it also is like, it provides incredible framework around calling out versus calling in, and how to have different conversations, and like, when do we need to pull a break to prevent harm from continuing versus like, when is it like, this is a person who I am invested in my relationship with them. And I really believe that calling someone in, and even calling someone out, but especially calling someone in, is an act of love and emotional labor. Like, you would not invest that emotional labor in somebody who you don't think is open to growth and who you don't want to have a continued honest relationship with. Yeah. So anyway, there's so much more in this small but brilliant book, but I think it's a really, really great starting off point. And then there's this other book that's actually a workbook. It's called Fumbling Toward Repair. It's a workbook for people who do accountability, facilitation, and community. And I don't like primarily do that work, but I have learned so much from people who do. And it's by Mariam Kaba and Shira Hassan. And it's Fumbling Toward Repair. And it's really incredible. And it also gives amazing language and framework and specific examples. And it is like a workbook. And so it has like, things you can fill out for like self-reflection or all different stuff. So
thank you so much for all of that, and for this whole conversation, and for just being who you are. Before we go into this last bit of song, this outro that sort of wraps up my feelings about the story, I wanted to say thank you again so much for listening, and for messaging me and telling me what was important to you. If you are listening to this and you feel that there's something you'd like to hear in maybe a second season, please let me know. Reach out to me on Instagram, Ballad of Dena and Andrea. I do hope to be back with more material soon. Also, some deeper dives on murder ballads, and I'm going to be writing a bunch of new ones throughout the year, and hopefully I'll pop those up on here as well. Okay, and here's a little outro bit to leave you with. So now what should we do with all of these humans who serve their time and sentences? Will we forgive them when? In the case of Dena and Andrea, with you I will plead to see that oppression and misogyny planted a seed in a bed of ignored maladies. It was bound to grow. A tortured mind will bend to make out reality. So how can we ever move forward if we can't look back and see? When we lock away our people and throw away the key. If learning from our mistakes is a mantra that we got, these two women's stories could teach us a whole lot. It takes a village, and that means so much more than a mob with pitchforks at every door. I am not just what I done or what was done to me. It's what we do with what comes next that can make us truly free.
If you'd like more information on postpartum psychosis and depression, please go to postpartum.net. There are additional links to mental health, safety, and reproductive resources in the show notes, as well as links to information mentioned in this show. You can listen to the full album of songs for the Ballad of Dena and Andrea on Spotify or Apple, wherever you find your music. Songs were written by me, Becky Poole, and produced by award-winning multi-instrumentalist, songwriter, and incredible music producer, Abby Posner. Find her at abbyposner.com. Theme also composed and played by Abby. Special thank yous to Evan Mosier for audio editing and mixing, to Andrew and the team at Voice Tracks West in Los Angeles, and to you for listening.